Oh,
All right, we are live.
absolutely.
Hi. Yeah.
I'm just gonna mute.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our fourth week of VAWMA. I can't believe that it's already been 4 weeks. It's crazy. But before we begin, we here at VAWMA and those gathered here tonight would like to acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the three fires known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, and further give thanks to the Chippewas of the Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. This event is being live streamed, so if you are watching at home and you still have any questions, please throw them in the chat, and we will bring them up for discussion whenever the time becomes available. As well, even if it doesn't have anything to do with this session, if you had questions from previous weeks, by all means, please throw any questions you have into the chat. There will be a 5 to 10 minute break before we introduce our guest speaker, Kevin Gustafson from All Things Co-op Podcast. And finally, we also want this to be an open discussion. Again, I know I've said this a bunch of times already, but if you have any questions, ask. If you need clarification, ask. So, my name is Catherine. Most of you know me as Kat in the discussions, and I am honored that James has allowed me to be a part of this project. He's been working on this for several months, and I want to give him a huge shout out. I have watched this go from an idea in his head to a 4-week event, and it's been super exciting. So, before we get into it, are there any questions? I'm going to take, yeah.
I was gonna say I don't think we have any questions yet, but I was hoping that we would get started closer to 7 rather than 5 minutes before. But that's okay. I think we're here now, so we should just get started.
Cool. You're right. We're 2 minutes early. That's my stage management. So, what is VAWMA? Why are we here early? For those of you that were here last week or previous weeks or have watched the last couple of video on demand, this will be more of a review for you. Perhaps you had some questions bubble up over the last week and you wanted more clarification on some things. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, I'm briefly going to go over the Coles notes of what is VAWMA and why are we here today. Just in case you have some background noise or the audio tends to go a little squirrely, I will be re-uploading this video with transcriptions with closed captioning available. So, so if there is little bits that you might have missed, please hang out. In 24 hours, I will have this video posted with the closed captions and a full transcription available. So essentially, why are we here today? We are here because the old way does not work for us anymore. The current business model is outdated, top-heavy, and has not changed while the evolving world around it has. The old way is servitude. The one with the money makes the decisions. Your self-worth is based on the dollar you make. VAWMA is about service, reciprocity, win-win. Equality equals equity. You are valued. What is VAWMA? The Voluntary Association for Work and Mutual Aid. No one is forcing you to be here. You chose to be here because you want change. You do not like the way current society is running, and you want to make a difference in your life, as well as support the cause to help others. You support the businesses, and in exchange, you get to share in the surplus. It's a win-win. So just like any business, there are foundations, cornerstones that make a successful co-op. There are 4 top cornerstones that VAWMA strive to make. Most importantly, we are mutual aid. We help one another. Utilizing meetings, just like this one, we open the floor for those that are in need. We discuss who can help who. If we can't get the help in the immediate, we look for solutions together, collectively. If you have a problem, you bring it to the table. If the immediate circle can't help, we bring it to the bigger circle. If we still cannot help, then we put the word out to neighboring co-ops and see if there's a solution there. Ultimately, we help one another. We are a union. We are a collective that agrees on all fronts on how our collective is run. You have a voice. Your opinion matters. If you do not agree with how something is running or being handled, speak up. As a collective, we are here together to cooperate and make a difference. Equality equals equity. We are a co-op incubator. Do you have a dream that you want realized? Have you always wanted to run your own business but never had the capital, the encouragement, or the support to do it? This is it. Bring your ideas to the table. Let us help you with the tools and resources to realize your goal. VAWMA is an umbrella corp. Under the heading of VAWMA, you have the individual businesses, and within that corporation, you are able to celebrate in the wins of the business that you support. You are able to reinvest in those business, or you can cash out at the end of the year. So what's our mission statement? What if there was an alternative to being a wage slave? That is what VAWMA is for, to give each member a living wage, control over their schedule, as well as to share in the surplus of businesses that they help support and run. If you don't agree with the way things are working, change it. If you think you have a set of skills or a business that would help others, if you wanted to start your own business and realize the dream of working for yourself and not the man, VAWMA is the starting spot. People are our bottom line. So what's a corporation? What is the difference between a co-op run business and a cooperative business? In a word, structure. Today's business flow looks like a hierarchy. The owner lives off the profits and the benefits of the business. The manager manages the checks and the balances of business, and based on the profit, gets a bonus for bringing in more profit. The supervisor, the illusionary position of management where they're paid hourly, sometimes salary, in order to make sure the rest of the workers are doing their job. And finally, you have the workers, scheduled for X number of hours per week in order to fulfill the needed shifts. With the VAWMA business flow, there are noticeable changes to this structure. Every member of VAWMA is an owner of the business. Managers are ultimately responsible for the profit and loss, the cost to sell for each business, but these people are also elected by the board of directors as well as the collective VAWMA members. The workers are the same level as supervisors. If an assistant is needed, then supervisors can support the managers in keeping up with the daily tasks. Workers are able to choose the hours they work, the amount of shifts they work, and are paid a living wage that is agreed upon by the collective. Workers and supervisors and managers are all on the same playing field when it comes to deciding the living wage and what hours are going to be run. So, I understand that that was a lot of information that I threw at you at one time. And I want to take the next few minutes just to unpack anything that you might not understand or clarify or review. If you've had any questions from previous weeks or previous VODs that you're like, hey, I had a question on how the mutual aid works and how that is supposed to run, throw it at us. Let's get the discussion going. What questions do you guys have?
Okay, doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat so far.
Nope, I am also seeing no questions on the live chat. So at this point, I am going to say thank you for your time this evening, and I'm going to hand things over to James now, and he's going to continue the discussion about the co-op businesses and how they are structured in a far greater detail. Senor James.
Thank you very much, Kat. And I would just like to say hello and welcome to everybody joining us online and to everybody who's here. Thank you for showing up, guys. I appreciate it. And just a very hello and fun welcome from the budding rural metropolis of Owen Sound, located in the northern half of southwestern Ontario. We're streaming at you live tonight from the Owen Sound Hub, which is located on the eastern half of Owen Sound. Tonight we're going to be discussing a couple of things. Let's see here. Let's pull up my share screen. So we are, as has been said already, the Voluntary Association for Work and Mutual Aid. And tonight we're presenting a cooperative community, a proposal. And so what is VAWMA? Just a quick recap. We are a mutual aid network. We are basically a group of friends coming together to check in with each other, make sure everybody's okay. And once we've made sure everybody's okay, we go on and check and make sure that our community is okay. And once we've made sure that our community is okay, we recognize that we are a union. We are a group of laborers bringing together our primary resource of generating wealth, which is our labor, whether it's skilled labor or manual labor. Whatever it is, it's our time and our effort that we put in our workplaces that ends up generating the wealth that we make. And so we recognize that our labor is our primary resource, and so we are going to pool our labor together as a collective to decide together what it is that we do, when it is that we do it, how it is that we do it, and what it is we do with what it is that we produce. Which brings us to the cooperative incubator. A cooperative business incubator is basically what we're going to become as we come together with our to pool our labor. We're going to create business places that hire us at a living wage and give us control over our schedules in ways that we don't at traditional businesses. And as we get more and more businesses up and running under the VAWMA corporation, we'll become something like an umbrella company or a holding company. I'm not too sure quite yet which language to use to describe what we are, but what we are is a community of businesses that are working together with the members therein in order to help make our community better, to prevent the extraction of wealth out of our local economies and keep them in our local economy as much as possible. Now, anybody who's had a chance to talk to me over the last number of years about this idea that has become VAWMA has known that I've had a couple of ideas that are core to how this works. It needs to be democratically directed. It needs to be community oriented, and it needs to pay a living wage, and it needs to give us control over our schedules. These are all things that are important to us. And part of the ways that we were going to do this is by using what was called the PIP system. The PIP system is known as Partners in Surplus. And the reason why we went with PIP instead of the other acronym is because the other acronym is a little vulgar. But we ran into a couple of snags. The PIP system was originally going to be designed to allow us to divvy up the surplus based on the amount of work that you put into it, any time you paid a membership due, or any time that you referred a customer to our business or bought something within our cooperative network, you would get a PIP, and that PIP would be a slice of the surplus. Well, we ran into a problem, and as we were getting feedback from these events, when one of the first things that we noticed is that the PIP system has never been tried before amongst the multitude of different cooperative businesses that are out there. So whenever they went to try and figure out what to do with the surplus, they never did what the PIP system was trying to do. So that was my first clue that perhaps it wasn't going to necessarily work like that. And then following up, we, as a result of these meetings that we've been having here on Monday, I got some feedback from a couple of different people, which led me to pursuing reading of different bylaws of existing cooperatives, as well as reading the laws in the books of Ontario and Canada to figure out what we can and cannot do. And it turns out the PIP system doesn't exactly fit within the current legal code with regards to what they call patronage. And patronage is just a fancy way of saying paying out the profit to the people who helped make the profit. And it's another way of talking about, if it was a traditional business, these would be the dividend shares that are paid out to the investors. So we learn, we evolve, and we become better. So last week on Tuesday, the entire idea, the entire foundation for how we were going to divvy up the surplus and amongst VAWMA got blown out of the water. But again, we learn, we evolve, we become better. And the good news is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. As we were researching this, we discovered that there's already a lot of tried and tested methods out there that are prescribed by law, as well as are being used successfully by different businesses out there. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are mixed multi-stakeholder co-ops are already a thing. What is a mixed multi-stakeholder co-op? Well, that's what we hope to be at VAWMA. And it's basically understanding that there are two kinds of members that we have, worker members and consumer members. And the distinction between the two is how patronage is calculated. The important thing to remember is that patronage is what we pay out of the profits, is what we pay out to our members. And if you're a working member, the patronage is based on the hours that you have worked at one of our cooperatives. If you're a customer, if you're a consumer, and you're a member of VAWMA, then the amount of patronage is calculated based on the amount of money that you spent with us. Kind of makes sense? Shop at our stores as a VAWMA member, you get money back. It's kind of a little bit like the Mountain Equipment Co-op, if anyone has ever been a part of that before. And so the important thing to remember here is that as much as the PIP system was a way and a method of allowing for us to democratically direct the surplus that we made within our businesses, the good news is that we now have a new way of a more tested and true way of directing the surplus through our members. So tonight we're just going to do a little bit of a recap of what we've gone through in the past three events, and just view them through the lens of this new system of how we do things, and not much has changed. So when we go looking at mutual aid, we still are a bunch of people coming together to just check in on each other. The basic idea being that we come together twice a month, first week and third week, and on these times when we get together, we just check in with each other, make sure everybody's good, and we go around circles, of 5 or 6 people at a time. And as we go around, we just check in and say, is everybody okay? And if everybody's okay, then we move on to the next person. And inevitably, I expect we'll come across somebody who might need a hand. And then that happens, we as a community basically say, well, okay, you need a hand, I can help out. And this is, of course, designed to help build community. Once we've gone around our circles and made sure that everybody's doing good, everybody's okay, we then break out the deck of cards, break out our guitars, break out the cribbage boards, break out a hot plate, have a potluck, and just have a good time together, celebrating each other's existence and coming together and forming a bit of community. And as we do that, we also commit to helping each other out. As we commit to helping each other out, just checking in and making sure that everybody's doing okay, we also commit to making sure that we're in a place to help out our community as community needs are identified. So in this case, I'm thinking like, we go to St. John's Ambulance and get our first aid, CPR sort of thing. Be ready to be prepared to help out in the event of disasters. Start up a phone network of people that have different skills that are able to help out in various times, or basically just showing up and helping out, volunteering in soup kitchens. We had a member of our group this past week was doing a clothing swap, or not a clothing swap, a toy swap in anticipation of Christmas and stuff. Being able to have members that are willing to come and be a part of that, I think is our goal and our vision for what we're trying to do. And losing the PIP system doesn't change any of that, so that's fine. So we move on because we can help. The next aspect, of course, of what we do is cooperative businesses. And this is where we start. It's very similar to before. We start with somebody who has an idea for a business. You then get 10 member signatures from amongst our members to sign off on it and say, yes, that's a good idea. We think that should see the light of day. At which point it then goes to the Cooperative Development Committee. They help you make sure your plan fits within our overall business model, make sure that it's legal, make sure that is something that comes up with a starting budget, an exit strategy, all these things that we need in order to do business. They sit down and help you figure it out. And then it goes before the board of directors. If the board of directors adopt it, we start funding your business idea, and we then start bringing in our dedicated members. So these are all members of the Voluntary Association for Work and Mutual Aid. These are all VAWMA members, and they are buying into your business vision, and they are going to do it. And the buy-in is based on the starting budget, which is then split between all these different members and paid out over time. So we don't have to be on the hook for thousands of dollars to get started. We'll only be on the hook for maybe $100 a month, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depends on the business, depends on how much it is to get started. But once we have our members, they form the workers' council that will then decide what it is or how that business is implemented and run. And then we do it. We start the local co-op, and the dedicated members will then become the working members of the cooperative. And as they work at the co-op, they will get hours, which will then determine how much of the money, the surplus that we produce, the profits that we produce, based on the hours that they work, that will determine their slice of the profits or the surplus there. We also have our customers, of course, that are coming in and buying at our local co-op. That's the whole point. We're here to do business, to meet a community need, and to make a bit of money in the process. And as we're doing that, we're going to have two sets of customers. We're going to have customers that are members of VAWMA. And as they come and they buy at our local cooperative, they will get patronage at the end of the year based on how much they spend. We also have other customers, non-members, and that's fine. Their money is as good as ours, good as anybody else's at our establishment. They're more than welcome to come to where we are selling stuff. The only difference is at the end of the year, if we make a surplus, they don't get to share in it. Pretty straightforward. Somebody asked me, one of the people that have been watching our events, they asked me to explain a little bit about what sociocracy is. For the uninitiated, sociocracy is a method of achieving group decision-making amongst a group of people, really. So when we have sociocracy, we talk about it in terms of circles, where everybody, kind of like Arthur's Round Table, no one person is kind of at the head, no one person is the dictator. So everybody has a chance and everybody has a say. Everybody has a moment who's a part of the circle where they get to speak, where they get to have a say in what it is that's going on. So in the example of our cooperatives, we're going to have times when the cooperative needs to decide what it is that they're going to do and how it is that they're going to do it. They're going to need to decide on policy. Once a month, at least once a month, the group of workers that run that business will get together and say, okay, we're going to take a look at the policies that we have in place, and we're going to change some of them because the policies either aren't working or they aren't working enough. And together, everybody who's on the floor or who's on the management side or who's behind in the warehouse, wherever it is, everybody's going to have a chance to have their input as to what they can do to improve things. And by the time we get to the end of it, we're then going to go around the circle and say, okay, everybody's had a chance to have their say. We're now going to figure out what it is that we're going to do. So here's the policy as it's presented, as everybody has come to agree. So we have one person agree, another person consents, but inevitably, as does happen, somebody objects. And when that happens, if their objection is valid, then we stop. We say, okay, what if we resolve your objection? What if we address what it is that you're having a problem with? And if we can address what it is that they're objecting to, then we can get to a point where that works and we move forward. And that's kind of sociocracy in a nutshell. Just remember, it's consensus-based group decision-making. And the point of sociocracy isn't to achieve the most perfect plan in the moment. The goal is to get to something that works and is safe enough to try. So the questions are, when we're approaching sociocracy and the questions of what we're doing and how we're doing it, the questions we're looking to answer is it good enough for now? Not perfect. Is it good enough for now? And is it safe enough to try? If it's safe enough to try and it's good enough for now and everybody's on the same page, we do it. And that's sociocracy. Which brings us to the other aspect of what it is that we talked about last week, and that is how we do businesses together. Unlike in the traditional world out there, where if you go into business for yourself, you're basically on the hook for looking after everything yourself. You're making sure that if your business is successful, you're competing against other people's businesses. In our way of doing things, though, we do things a little bit differently. Every business that's a part of our network helps each other out. So in our example here, we've got 3 different possible businesses that are operating under the VAWMA banner. We've got the retail cooperative, we've got an industrial cooperative, they make doohickeys, and we've got a farming cooperative, they grow stuff. And our retail cooperative, our industrial cooperative, and our farm cooperative all have monthly budget goals based on the people that they have working there and based on their operating costs, what they need to buy in order to sell, that sort of thing. And if we think of this as starting in January, each business starts in January with the month of January already set aside. All the wages, all the supply costs is already set aside and is good to go. So day 1 in January 1st, we're starting to save up money for the first month of February. We spend the next 3 weeks trying to save up money to get to February. So at the end of these 3 weeks in January, first 3 weeks in January, we're at a point where we're checking to see what we're looking like for February. The retail co-op is looking good, the industrial co-op is looking good, but the farm is going slow. Its revenues are just not adding up. So they don't have enough money for their February budget going into February. That's okay, because our businesses are going to come alongside and they are going to work together to help top up the farm cooperative with the extra that they're making in order to make sure that the farm cooperative is ready for February by the time February hits. Okay, so now we're going to spend the next couple of weeks saving up for March. And just like before, some businesses are doing well, some businesses are doing not so well. In this case, the retail cooperative over the next couple of weeks in January and February went really slow. So they were not able to save up enough money for March. But our doohickeys and our farm, they must be selling roasted chestnuts or something, is doing really well. And so they are going to help out our retail cooperative meet their budget goals for March. And then, of course, once we've got March sorted out, we then need to look after April, and which is the beginning of the next quarter. So we're going to save up enough money for the beginning of the next quarter so that when we start the next quarter, the beginning of April, everybody's good to go. And it's this time it's the industrial co-op's turn to just lag a little bit behind. But like I said before, we help each other out. So even though the industrial co-op's lagging behind, we're going to top them up and make sure that going into April, they're going to have enough money in the bank in order to pay their bills, cover their utility costs, make sure everybody gets their paycheck. So once we do that, we're now looking at a couple of weeks left in the quarter where everything we make is now surplus. This is the profit. This is where we make money. This is where it all breaks even. And we then turn around and we invest that. And that's what I wanted to talk to everybody here tonight, is how VAWMA proposes that we invest that surplus, how we reinvest that profit within our community and split it amongst everybody who helped make it. So going back to our example before, we've got 3 different businesses, 3 different sectors, all moving along every quarter, happily doing business, helping each other out, helping each other get to the point where they're making a surplus. And once they get to the point where they're making a surplus, we then bring that down into a single big, huge tub, as I like to think of it, that is collected and then administered by our board of directors. Now, the board of directors is made up of members of VAWMA, of the Voluntary Association for Work and Mutual Aid. We've got 3 named positions: the president, the treasurer, and the secretary, and these are all elected members of the General Assembly. We also have each of these businesses has a member of their circle, their worker circle, sitting on the board as well. So the retail co-op has somebody sitting on the board of directors, the industrial co-op has somebody sitting on the board of directors, and our farmers cooperative has somebody sitting on the board of directors. And for each of these members of the businesses, of the co-ops that are part of the board of directors, we have a matching somebody on the other side of the board who is elected from the General Assembly. And these people are there to represent our consumers and our consumers' interests. So we have a balance of workers' interests and a balance of consumer interests represented within our cooperative. So all that to say, these people are the people who decide what happens to the surplus. And the surplus gets chopped up into a couple of different sections. The first section that gets set aside before we do anything else is the emergency reserve. We have to set that aside by law, which is fine. We would have done that anyways because it's a good idea. This is the money that we tap into when we start losing money so that none of us are on the hook for chipping in to make sure that we stay afloat. This is the money that gets set aside for a rainy day. Okay, well, that's fine. We then have another section over here of the surplus, which gets reinvested into the cooperative. So these are our reinvestments. We're going to go into a little bit more details about them here in the next slide. But the important thing to remember here is that our board of directors gets to determine a slice of this part of the surplus. But also we reach out to our members and we ask them what it is that they would like us to be investing in. And our members are able to direct a certain amount of the surplus as well. We then have this section over here, which is the patronage. This is like the dividend shares. This is where the pay comes out. This is where people get the money that they've been putting in. This is when it comes back out. And it's split between our workers based on the hours worked, and it's split between our consumers based on the products they purchased. So just a little word about how patronage is calculated then. Based on the hours worked, it's based on the total hours worked. So if we have, say for an example, we have one cooperative, and in this cooperative we have 5 members who are working in the cooperative. They're working full-time this week, so everybody worked 40 hours. So we have 5 members who worked 40 hours for a total of 200 hours. Each of those members worked 40 hours out of that 200, and that 40 out of 200 becomes the percentage at which they engage or they get to have patronage. So in this particular example, it's real easy. Everybody put in 40 hours for a total of 200 hours, so everybody gets 20% of the patronage. That patronage is then split a couple of different ways between different accounts and is paid out either through check or put into your account that is created when you become a member with us. And then that money that is in the account gets reinvested through our business. So at any rate, the idea for community reinvesting is the idea that we take that surplus, let's go back here, this surplus here, and this little chunk of the surplus, which is going to be set aside for reinvesting. So we're going to send out a ballot that looks something like this to every single member of VAWMA to check off about a month before or a month or two before our annual meeting, which happens at the end of the year. And at the annual meeting, we find out how much money we've made, we find out how much our surplus is worth, how much we're getting in patronage, which is all determined by the board of directors. But again, about a month or so before we get to that annual meeting, every member will be sent a ballot that looks something like this. And on the ballot, they'll ask to be checked off which businesses, new businesses, or projects that VAWMA is supporting they would like to see funded. In the case of established cooperative businesses, these aren't the operating budgets. Those operating budgets will already be established and already be in place. So this is not to see whether or not your business that you're working for continues to be funded. This is for to see if your business that you're working for will have more money set aside for special projects, for expanding their business, for being able to do something a little bit greater, maybe putting a new paint job, renovating. Whatever it is. Maybe it's just that money will go to the overall operating costs and help them get to the point where they're making a surplus that much faster. In any case, you are given the option to be able to reinvest back in one of the businesses that you work for. We also, like I said at the beginning, are a cooperative business incubator. And one of the ways that we start new businesses is we fund them by using this surplus that we've set aside. So at the end of the year, when all of our businesses have made money, we take a part of it and we say, we're going to reinvest that into a new business. And we ask our members, if you want to support a new business, how many of the new businesses do you want to support? And our board of directors is going to be the people that end up administrating what our members ask us to do. I should say, before we move on too far along, we've got community projects as well. And a community project is not a business. It's not there to make money. It's there to provide something for the community. So one of the things I often like to think of is something like providing a playground for a park in the city that is currently empty or dilapidated. That is something we could do as a VAWMA community. We can say we want to set some money aside to be put into a park in the community. Another thing we could do is set aside projects for members of our community that are, say, artists. So if there is a member of VAWMA who knows of an artist that wants to produce a project where their expenses for the project are covered, where their living expenses are covered through the form of a wage, at that point, that becomes something that that member can then take 10 member signatures, get signed off on it, submit it towards the board of directors or the General Assembly. If it's adopted, it goes onto this ballot. And as this ballot goes to our members, if the members end up putting money towards that artist project, once that artist project meets its budget goals, it gets greenlit and it goes ahead. So we're going to talk a little bit about how this stuff gets greenlit and go ahead. So we've got our surplus that has been decided on by the board of directors, that this is the allotment that we're going to reinvest the money that we made. And just for example, we're going to say that that's 500,000. Doesn't really matter what the number is. It's just an example. But of that 500,000 that we're reinvesting in our community, 200,000 of it is going to be up to board discretion. So the board is going to be able to decide what happens to this 200,000. But what happens with this 300,000 is determined by our members through these ballots. So the idea is that each member will check off all of these that apply to them that they want to see supported. So we send the ballot off and our first member sends it back and they check off that they want this business here, co-op business 2, to be funded. So we put a box over there to indicate that that is one for that business. We then have the 2 new cooperative businesses. This person wants to see both of them happen, so they get a checkbox. We also want to see the community project 2, the artists, see their project come into fruition. So that's happening. So that's our first ballot. We then go into the next ballot, and the next member, they want the other business to get started. So that goes into this box over here. We now indicate that this box is going to be one of the 300,000. That 300,000 is going to be divvied up into these little boxes here based on what we have coming in. So then we move on to the next ballot. The next person wants their third co-op established. Co-op number 2, new co-op business is going to be funded there. And then we've got et cetera. Et cetera is just whatever I can't think of that a member of our community thinks of that we think that we should reinvest in. Well, it's our money. If you think it should be reinvested in, maybe some other members think it should be reinvested in, and we put it out there. And if it meets its budget goal, we make it happen. So we keep going through until we get to the point where we have a rough idea as to where this 300,000 is going to be divvied up between our different members. And this ends up being distributed to the different areas based on where things are going. Now, the board has discretion to be able to top things up. So co-op number 3, for example, is looking to reinvest a little bit into where it's going into the future, but it needs, say, 50,000 and they're 20,000 short. Well, the board of directors can move 20,000 from this pile of money over here into this pile over here and make sure that they get to do what it is that they want to do. At the end of the day, it's just a way of making sure that our members can put funding towards things that they want to have happen and want to see happen within our community. So that kind of brings us to where we're at with our current proposal. So we are basically, what I'm going to propose is that if we do this, we get together for this this is our kind of a roadmap. Now, this is not set in stone. The ideas that we have here are just general sort of guidelines. So for the first year that this sort of idea is in process, what I propose is that we get together on a weekly basis and we do a 4-week rotation. On weeks 1 and 3, we do our mutual aid gathering where we just check in with each other, make sure everybody's doing okay. Break out the cards, break out the guitars, break out a hot plate and have a potluck. Make sure everybody's doing all right. And meantime, while we're having our mutual aid meetings, we can also teach ourselves a little bit about what it is to build a healthy community, to dream up doing healthy or community projects, basically just looking out for each other. Then in weeks 2 and weeks 4 of our 4-week rotation, we get together and we do cooperative business development. We get together and we dream about what it is that we can do together in order to give people good jobs, in order to give people good living wages, in order to give people that opportunity to produce something with their lives and enjoy the fruits of what it is that they're producing. And we just keep doing that until we come up with a business plan that we can galvanize around. And if we do that, hopefully within the first year, but if not, by the year 2, we should definitely have incorporated around our first business idea. And as we incorporate around our first business idea, we'll have our dedicated members that are working at that business. We'll have our general membership that are supporting that business as we come in from the outside to put in a little bit to help that business along. As we move along and as we incorporate and get our first business off the ground and everybody is doing their best to support that business, we then, by the time we get to year 3, we should be looking at starting our second business and as well as co-developing benefit businesses. So one of the things that I would love for us to be able to do as we take off and as we start making money is reinvesting that money into things like childcare, into things like dental programs, medical programs, optical programs, group insurance programs, and offsetting the cost of those by using the surplus that we generate so that it's affordable for everybody who's a part of our network. And so just thinking about that as well, if we can come up with business plans that provide a benefit to everybody that's doing things, we don't even necessarily need to have that business make money if we're able to offset what that business is doing through the other businesses that are making money. And again, I'm thinking about running childcare, not necessarily for profit, but for the service of watching our kids while we're at work, whether or not we make money and watching our kids. That having been said, by the time we get to year 4, we'll hopefully have started our third business. And we will be centralizing things like bookkeeping and accounting. But at that point, we might start looking at getting a human resources / member services department up and going so that we have people that are there to make sure that our members are getting what it is that they're buying into. And then by the time we get to year 5, we're starting up our 4th, 5th, 6th businesses. And hopefully we're creating a network of businesses that are all looking out for each other and all helping each other to survive, not just survive, but to thrive. So that's about it. We started a little bit early, so we started about 10 minutes early, so I'm about 10 minutes ahead of where I was planning on being at this point in the presentation. So I would just like to open up and ask if anybody has any questions about what we've covered so far. I know it's always awkward when the questions are out there.
Is there any way that we can minimize the pitfall that I see in this?
Yes.
Is either the money is becoming very great in the savings account,
Mhm.
or we are having a financial collapse in a major portion.
Right. So
What can we do up front to minimize the chaos that happens in either of those scenarios?
well, if I understand,
Either one of those scenarios are a big challenge. Potentially, this is the end of the road.
right. If I understand your concern correctly, and I might not, so feel free to correct me if I'm not understanding it. But as we make money, or if we don't make money, what do we do when we run into that, right? So in the event that we make money, we're doing our best to spell out ahead of time what it is that we're going to do when we make money, so that nobody is surprised. We want everybody to be aware that when we make money, like 10% of it has to go to forced savings. We set that aside for the rainy day. Maybe it's more than that, maybe it's less than that. There's a legal amount that we have to set aside. Okay. Then we have the rest of the money that we make, if we make any money, that gets set aside, that is then split between money we pay out to us, the patronage, or money that we reinvest within the cooperative, which is what we just kind of went over in the example there. The board of directors gets to decide how big these two chunks are. So the board of directors gets to decide how much is paid out in patronage and how much is reinvested. So in the early years, when we're still starting up and we aren't necessarily making money, then at that point, the patronage section will probably be smaller than our reinvestment section. We're probably going to be trying to reinvest more money in our business at the beginning than we pay ourselves out at the beginning, which is fine. That's just good business decision.
As you reinvest, you are getting your businesses financially viable.
Yes.
They're no longer doing everything hands-on. Sometimes they are mechanizing something within their business because they have the fund to draw on.
Yeah. And when they mechanize within that business, it's being driven by the workers that are doing it, and they get to reap the benefits of that mechanization, which is nice, which is different. You know, normally when things get mechanized, we get fired.
That's right.
Yeah. In our system, we mechanize. In this system,
So we've never had this low an unemployment rate in our history. We have the lowest ever. We're screaming for bodies this idea that mechanization or robotics is putting people out of work right now is completely absurd, because every employer is screaming for.
That's just looking at today.
Yeah, I know, but
Down the road, the economy can do this.
Although you do bring up an interesting point. And one of the things, I'm friends with a couple of business owners, and one of the things that they complain about is finding workers and being able to find and maintain and retain workers. And the often complaint is nobody wants to work. And I don't know if that's true. I know that I don't want to be a wage slave. I want to work, but I don't want to be somebody else's wage slave. And what we're trying to do with VAWMA is we're trying to connect people to the work that it is that they're doing, so that when they work hard, when they put in the effort, when they put in the energy, they get more back at the end of the year. Yeah. So did I address?
The one area you haven't touched on is what happens when things go down.
Yeah.
I see this scenario happening possibly where the initial step is personal investment.
Mhm.
We each put in X number of dollars
Yes.
into the kitty
Yes,
to start the whole process.
that's correct. There will be an associated members fee. So I've conceived of it as to be a member of VAWMA. I suggest that we started at something that's affordable, $25 a month, $300 a year. You know,
Or
you can
a lump sum.
a lump sum, $300 a year, or $25 a month, and that puts everybody. That chips in a little bit. That gives us a little bit to start with. What we have dedicated members, the people who are going to be working at the business, they chip in a little bit more. They have a buy-in associated with being a part of that business. And that buy-in is based on the startup cost of that business. So again, we figure out how much money we need to get that business up and off the ground for 3 months.
And it's important
Yeah.
for everybody to feel that they are really part of this. It isn't like when the nosedive happens, we all run to the door because we each feel, well, we're really not part of this.
Mm-hmm.
We're just out of cash for the necessities of life.
Right.
And that is very close to where we are with going concerns right now.
True.
People feel very isolated when things fall apart.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess our goal with VAWMA is to, like, we're already working. We're already doing the jobs. We've proved that we can go to work. We've proved that we can do it. We just need to start doing it for ourselves now, rather than for the Waltons or for Jeffrey Bezos. And Loblaws, yeah. It'd be interesting to see if we could create and carve out an alternative to these different resource or wealth extraction businesses that pull money out of our local economies and send them down to Bay Street or Wall Street or wherever it is that to send them, meanwhile giving us back minimum wage. Well, this way we're going to be giving everybody a living wage, and we're going to be all committed to making sure that these businesses float as best as they can. And in the event that we can't make a go of it, in the event that we've chosen a business that is a dud, that doesn't make money, we do have exit strategies. We do have a liquidation process. All of our businesses are designed to be operated for at least 1 quarter, and everybody will get a paycheck. Nobody will be going without a paycheck.
Nobody gets thrown out the front door.
Right. We have, every business will be planned ahead for at least 3 months to be able to have enough money to keep the lights on and to pay everybody and to do what we need to do to keep it on. And if at the end of those 3 months we've looked at the books and we figured out, friends, we're not making any money, what do we do? Well, at that point we start the liquidation process. If we can't figure we can't get things to happen. Yeah.
If I may cut in here, James, I think this might be a good time to segue into how I can help support the business side of things.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna thank you everybody for your questions and discussion. We're going to talk about or let Kat talk a little bit about what she does and how it is that she's been supporting what's been going on here tonight. So take it away, Kat.
Perfect. I will take over if you don't mind.
By all means.
I think this is the one I want. Is this what I want? I don't know how to share. I think this is what I want. And I want to pin myself, but I don't want to pin you. I want you to go away. Nope. This one. Ha! There we go. I'm learning how to stream. Professional streamer. Seriously though. My name is Catherine, and some of you may have recognized me from my time at one of the local big box stores that will remain unnamed. I do come from 15 years of retail management of a multi-million-dollar big box store. I I've been the assistant store manager. I have been a backroom manager. I've been inventory manager. I have been cash manager. I finally decided that instead of going to work every day, breaking my back, breaking my wrist, insert any adjective you want here, I was going to break it on my own. And so I went back to school and I became a transformational life coach. What does that mean? That means that I am trauma aware in ways that I can help you deal with your stuff. I like to call it your stuff because mental health is still mental health. I am slightly digressing from the business side of things, but where I am going to segue back into is being trauma aware for transformational life coaching and executive coaching go hand in hand. What is an executive coach? That is someone that helps you build your executive mentality. Do you want to build your own business? I can help you do that because I have done that. I have the retail experience. I know how to build a business plan. I know how to give you your SMART goals, and I know how to progress at a stage that you are guaranteed to make money. I think with my help with James over the last 3 months, as I had mentioned before, this went from a thought passing in his head to a 4-week event where he has been streaming. He has been gathering you guys, everyone who's sitting there in person right now and who's watching at home. You guys have all come together because you want to support VAWMA, you want to support your friend, and you want to support your community. And so I want to support that as well. And so as an executive coach, anyone who is willing to dedicate their business to the VAWMA Collective, I am willing to give 50% off for any of my services. Because I want to see you succeed. I want to see you have that business that you've always wanted to do. If you wanted to have Tasty Treats Bakery, this is your chance to do it. And this is the perfect time to do it because we have the mindset of we are done. So, with that being said, with all due respect, I am going to pass it over to James so he can shout us out to the 5-minute break before we bring in our guest speaker, Kevin.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're going to take just a quick, I don't know, 2 to 5 minute break. Let you stretch your legs, use the washroom, smoke them if you got them. And then we're going to come back. We're going to have Kevin Gustafson come and speak to us a little bit about what he does with the All Things Co-op podcast, and as well as his insights into cooperative way of doing things. So just like to say thank you, everybody, once again for coming, and please don't go too far. We'll be right back in about 2 to 5 minutes. Well, we're actually, do we want to get started?
What is the ultimate goal in seeing we coming in time-wise?
Oh, we're about to have the guest speaker give their presentation now, and then we'll have some time at the end for more discussion.
What time is
9 o'clock is when we're going to come to an end.
that's one thing I needed for last sentence. Figure out what the determination.
Oh, 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, we'll send everybody home. So, hello and welcome everybody back to the internet. We're kind of streaming again. I hope we're going to give a minute for everybody to join back in our presentation here. Yeah, it is a little chilly, isn't it? Yeah. Oh. No, that's fine. I would just like to take a moment to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. Kevin Gustafson is the host of All Things Podcast, or All Things Co-op, a podcast about cooperatives, hosted through the Democracy at Work Foundation. And I'm incredibly excited to have him on and to hear what it is that he is going to be sharing with us this evening. Kevin, without further ado, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Just making sure everybody can hear me all right. Assuming you can, I'll get started. So, my favorite introduction to any kind of talk is based on what I used to hear from one of my intellectual idols, not so much political, depending on how you see it, Christopher Hitchens, which is brothers, sisters, comrades, friends. Thanks, James and the team at VAWMA for inviting me to speak here today. It's an honor to be part of the conversation, and I want to talk to you tonight about my work in the field, which is mostly hosting the bi-weekly podcast produced by Richard Wolf's Democracy at Work, called All Things Co-op. And to give a little bit, I think in some ways, in my perspective about what I've learned through the course of the conversations that I've had on that podcast. So to start, in Robert Owen's The Social System, he says, quote, there is but one mode by which man can possess in perpetuity all of the happiness which his nature is capable of enjoying. That is by the union and cooperation of all for the benefit of each. Union and cooperation in war obviously increases the power of the individual 1,000-fold. Is there a shadow of a reason why they should not produce equal effects in peace? Why the principle of cooperation should not give to men the same superior powers and advantages in the creation, preservation, distribution, and enjoyment of wealth? And I think truer words have seldom been spoken. And while Owen, like Saint-Simon and Fourier and others, were cast aside as merely utopian socialists by Marx and Engels, the cooperative core of their early experiments in socialist construction provided a kind of antidote to the disheartening history of the 20th century experiments in what Mikhail Bukharin would have called state socialism, where the core aspect of this new economic order would be one that embodied the revolutionary slogans of liberty, equality, and solidarity, would get crushed under the combine of a red state apparatus. So for me, I've never been shy about my views on political economy, and I don't blush when I call myself a socialist, which tends to elicit responses on the spectrum from disgust to vitriol. However, my understanding of socialism is not one in which there's some kind of holy canon from which we can quote universal truths, chapter and verse, but that at its core, a socialist vision of the world is one informed primarily by a desire for freedom, equality, solidarity, democratic participation, and common ownership of the enterprises for which we are all engaged. We We need not be utopians, though, and we can find examples of this reality already existing in our world today, just as Voltaire reminds us that the present is pregnant with the future. And this future in which the present moment is pregnant with is the cooperative economy. And I have to give credit to almost anyone who is engaged in cooperative endeavors, but particularly James and the folks here today for their incredible vision of what this kind of cooperative system might look like and how to grow it. But apparently, following Marx's lead, those who criticize the failures of the current system, something trivially easy to do, tend to reside in that position permanently as sort of perpetual critics. And this hardly lends itself to anything like a genuine political project. And in my experience, tends to alienate already alienated workers from a project of their own liberation. So we have to find a new tactic, something positive for which we can affirmatively advocate. And this demands that we see our examples to which we can point to and say, that's what we're for. So this is the goal for me of the All Things Co-op podcast, the podcast by Democracy at Work, to kind of unite those who would consider themselves socialist or sort of oriented politically, but might have little or no awareness of cooperatives and actual engagement in economic pursuits. And those cooperative people who are really focused on economic pursuits, but might have little to no awareness or a kind of aversion to what we might call socialism. So as the co-host of the podcast with my comrades Larry Fenster and Chinar Achin, we try to bring these two groups closer together through insightful conversations with various actors in the cooperative space to understand the kind of day-to-day and real challenges and rewards of cooperative engagement, or maybe just to talk amongst ourselves, where we try to connect the threads between leftist theory and cooperative reality. And so this, you could say, is our praxis. So overall, I've learned that the current situation demands a kind of tripartite approach. First is the education and sort of education and awareness raising, which is the point of the All Things Co-op podcast. I've been surprised in some ways how little most people know about cooperatives, how they work, how they're set up, what their goals are, and how they can compete with standard sort of capitalist businesses. So that's our first goal. Our first kind of step is to educate, make people aware of what this cooperative future really, or what cooperatives really are about, how they function, and what they can provide to us today. The second approach is a kind of cooperative development approach, meaning we need to develop cooperatives everywhere, but most importantly in places where the traditional economy fails communities. And I would say that this is mostly in small towns and in rural areas. I do see cooperatives as a major way in which we can develop otherwise left behind communities, which again, I think VAWMA is really potentially slated to be a very important actor. And then lastly, it's the idea is that we need to coordinate these projects together, both the education and the actual sort of engagement in economic endeavors, into a political movement, into a political campaign. I mean, as a fairly dyed-in-the-wool political economist, I find tearing apart the sort of political from the economic to be a sort of fool's errand. There's a nakedly political element to the work of Democracy at Work, and I think to cooperatives generally, because it relies on the cooperative connections and allegiances to bolster a larger political project, to advocate for, at minimum, more friendly cooperative laws and regulations, and potentially at maximum to reform the economic structure of our entire society such that it is not oriented towards the private ownership of the means of production for the sake of personal profit, but instead cooperative ownership of the means of production for cooperative benefits. So let's talk about the first one, the education. Now, obviously, all things co-op, like I said, is squarely in that first camp. We're about education and, in the Marxist parlance, consciousness raising. We don't really do a lot of political advocacy. Technically, in the U.S., we're a 501c4, which means that we can't, 501c3, which means we can't advocate. That's a different part of our internal revenue tax code. And so our goal is not necessarily to promote candidates or talk about legislation, but really just to raise awareness, which is why we are first and foremost about creating content for public consumption. And so I want to maybe start by just kind of describing how All Things Co-op was able to provide me a sort of education. I came into All Things Co-op feeling like I knew a lot about co-ops. I went to law school. I learned about cooperatives and business organizations, but it wasn't until we really started this project that I was able to connect with different people and learn all the things that I essentially didn't know. So even on the first season of the podcast, we sort of got our sea legs, you might say. We were still audio only podcast. We're now video on YouTube and different things like that. And although I'm immensely proud, it was fairly early on. But we did our first interview with Ben Winter of Pedal People, a worker-owned co-op in Northampton, Massachusetts, that uses bicycles to transport goods and provide services like trash pickup and things like that. Very simple, very sort of down to earth and very local, but was incredible to learn how they started, how they organized, how they bring people in, how they cooperatively and democratically decide what it is that they do with the profits that they make. And it was one of the first introductions of actually talking to somebody in a cooperative about how that all worked. And it was a revelation. But even in that first season too, we understood this political aspect too. And as part of that, Larry Fenster, who has got a PhD in economics and is very well aware of how cooperatives and sort of theoretical positions regarding in terms of leftist ideology mix, did a presentation, a great presentation that I would definitely encourage everybody to look at, which is why socialism needs co-ops. And of course, I would paraphrase at the end of that, why co-ops need socialism. Talking about the interconnection of these two things from a very fundamental and theoretical perspective. But we also got nakedly political, talking about the Main Street Employment Ownership Act in the United States Congress. But at the same time, we got international, which is another important thing. We talked about the history of Emilia Romagna in Italy, which is among the most, has the highest concentration of cooperatives in the world. We talked to Camilla Pinheiro about the cooperative sector and the role of cooperatives that are in shaping in Cuban society. We talked with Peter Gowan of the Democracy Collaborative about a recently published paper on the right to own, meaning if a business is going to close, we should give the workers in that business the right to buy that business and run it as a worker cooperative. These are all the kind of conversations that we talked about in our first season. And for me, it was one of those revelatory moments in my life in which I realized all of these things, none of these things are apart. There's no fine line between the education, the political, and the actual on the ground work of helping cooperatives start. All of these things mix together, and they're all only successful so long as they actually mix together. That season taught me a lot. And I think my main takeaway was that prior to any possibility of some kind of grand societal change, the masses have to be, in Marxist parlance, I guess you'd say, have their consciousness raised about cooperatives. And that was the role that we wanted to play. And I think as part of that, that's why we switched and talked about in the second season of the podcast, we did, I think it was 11 episodes about the Rochdale principles. And I'm sure that those here are familiar with the Rochdale principles. But I mean, if you're very curious, you can join us for an hour discussion of each individual Rochdale principle discussion because they're incredibly important. And I do think that for me, of course, background in history, the Rochdale Society of Equitable Pioneers in Rochdale, England, came out with their Rochdale principles, the cooperative principles that we still know today, in 1844. And I think that period, the sort of 1840s, is one of the most interesting periods of history. You have Marx penning his first philosophical writings and meeting Engels. Proudhon published What is Property, in 1840. The world was introduced to Jane Eyre and A Christmas Carol, Three Musketeers. Kierkegaard published Fear and Trembling. Thoreau gave us Civil Disobedience. And by the end of the decade in 1848, the entire European continent went into revolt. What a decade to be alive. But to not get lost in the annals of history, I think it's worthwhile to in some ways highlight some of these Rochdale principles because they interweave and interconnect with the most important aspects of cooperative ideology, if you would call it that, and even praxis in terms of actually engagement in the real world. Principles like the democratic member control, that organizations must be controlled by their members. Now, this is the principle that we know very well in our political lives in terms of liberal, bourgeois political systems, in terms of that we have voting rights. They're so-called democratic republics. Yet this does not extend into the economic sphere for a lot of historical and economic contingencies. But this is one of the reason why the second principle of the Rochdales is so important, that right away up front, we're talking about democratic member control of enterprises. This is not a monarchy. This is not a dictatorship. We are about democracy. The same goes with economic participation, that it's necessary for those who are engaged in enterprises to not merely, in some ways almost passively, just add their labor to the process, but instead that they're actually engaged meaningful with what they do. We see so often that although we have seen an incredible rise in productivity, while at the same time we see not a rise in wages and other benefits, we do see a disconnection that people have, a kind of deep alienation, that while, yes, you might have been significantly alienated from the work that you did at the Ford Motor Factory back in the early 20th centuries, the work that you're going to do at, say, McDonald's or even, some software company feels so disconnected from what it is that you are and what it is that you want to do, that this disconnection produces a decrease ultimately in the kind of efficiency that we could engage with if we were to liberate individuals from the wage relationship with their employer, and instead organize them in a way in which their participation, not only in decision making and kind of management decisions, but actually on real deal financial and other kind of economic participation, was sort of encouraged. We see the results of Mondragon having encouraged this, is that you see somebody whose maybe day-to-day job is to sweep the floors, but who also can tell you what the profit and loss of last month was. This becomes an incredibly useful means of creating workers who are not just cogs in a machine, but who are in a fully integrated way the machine. But that the other principles like autonomy and independence, education, training, and information, and cooperative among cooperatives, these principles, the idea that the goal of these cooperative entities is not just simply the private pursuit of financial gain. The often criticism from the left of cooperatives, of those sort of state socialists of the Marxist type, would be that they're just another kind of capitalist business and that they're engaged in exploiting themselves. But the Rochdale principles push against this. And they say, no. We are engaged in different kinds of principles. Yes, we might live, we might have to exist in the broader capitalist economy, but that individually inside our organizations and amongst each other, we can operate on different principles. And they do. Principles that cooperatives are autonomous self-help organizations controlled by their members, that they provide education and training to their members so that they can become more fully engaged in the operation of the enterprise, and that most importantly, they work together in order to achieve common goals. The most important common goals to develop the cooperative ecosystem in its entirety. So this theoretical approach, this way of understanding cooperatives and through theory is foundational. It's important to be able to sort of stand on that, to be able to look at the world around us and to say, what is it that we should really do? And on that, to get back to brass tacks, is growing cooperatives. And from the perspective of the All Things Co-op podcast, we realized that as we talked very theoretically in the Rochdale principles, that we needed to talk about and to people who were engaged in this of really growing cooperatives and building the ecosystem that's necessary to allow them to survive. And as part of that, in our season 3, we had amazing conversations with people like Matt Kropp, the co-executive director of the Vermont Employee Ownership Center, with Jamila Medley, with the executive director of the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance, Charity Schmidt and Ruth Rolick of the Madison, Wisconsin Cooperative Development Coalition. We talked with the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. We talked to Steve Storkin, the executive director of the Employee Ownership Expansion Network. And in the course of these conversations, it became evident to me that what we need is one, potentially, or maybe a few central organizations to facilitate intercooperative dialogue, the sharing of best practices, and to streamline processes of developing new cooperatives. I think what we're doing here today is part of that that process of really coalescing and coming together to create identifiable organizations and place points that we can say, this is where you go if this is what you need. And I think that it takes time. It's almost as if, if you were to envision a kind of cosmic event in which one thing hits another, and there's this giant sort of spew of material that eventually kind of coalesces around a center of gravity. I think that each time we get into a kind of economic crisis in our bourgeois capitalist system, that happens, and these parts of the thing that used to be held together spray off and come out and then coalesce back kind of around into a new thing, a new way of orienting towards this sort of center of gravity. And what I've seen over the course of the last, let's say, decade of doing this kind of work is that this is really happening, and that us here today is a representative of that, but that this is happening all over the world. And so while it happens in individual areas around the world, based on the kind of the unique aspects of each place, there needs to be a coalescing. There needs to be a coming together of these organizations into a kind of international organization that can help facilitate dialogue, discussions, best practices, and other kinds of things, so that we can really grow the cooperative economy to present a challenge against the traditional single owner, exploitative, extractive economy that we live in today. So, to get political, we need to recognize that the limitations of our ability to organize outside of politics. It has been a long discussion in those who've criticized capitalism. I mean, anyone who's listened to the Revolutions podcast which I highly recommend. If you're not familiar with it, I would definitely tune into that. But for those who have listened, there's a great discussion about how Proudhon and the anarchists had a kind of theory that the goal wasn't to take over the state, as Marx and other people suggested, but was really just to ignore it, to create a autonomous, independent non-state outside of the traditional state apparatus, which would, by its existence, I guess, and its promotion, supersede the state. That quite obviously, in the course of human history, has not happened. But that we need to recognize that that is a project in which is going to lead nowhere. That if we look at Robert Owen and Saint-Simon and Fourier and anyone who didn't have a political project, they went nowhere. And so we do have to recognize that we need to get political, that we need to recognize that in the course of educating the grand masses and to create institutions and countless cooperative endeavors, that these need to be the basis for a new political movement. That instead of organizing around purely ideological issues like oppression regarding race, class, or other kinds of things, instead to do as the liberal bourgeoisie did back in the 18th and 19th centuries, which is to say that we are already organizing ourselves a new economy, a new system, a new way of doing things with a kind of new ethos and a new organizational structure. And that this exists, and that this is a not only, say, morally or ethically better system, but actually a more efficient economic system. And that it can cut through the fetters of full human flourishing that our current economic paradigm constrains on individuals. So we need to translate what we are growing in terms of our economic power into political power. So we can't be naive. We live in a dictatorship of capital, where the creators of common sense, quote unquote, very much not the common sense of Thomas Paine, seek to limit the discourse and the political policy potentials in our current world. We're told that, any government assistance to cooperatives would be like other regulations, a limitation on the free market. So be it, I would say. We're not slaves to the free market, but instead we have to advocate for a democratic market with worker-owned and controlled enterprises at the very center of that market. And don't get me wrong, this is no easy task given the prevailing winds in our society today. But rather than succumb to the vicissitudes of a market controlled by Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or the Thompson family in Canada, we must create an actually functional market where enterprises, democratic at their core, lay the foundation for a new labor republic. And this labor republic can set forth the rules for a new and sustainable economic foundation on which the rest of society, our interactions amongst each other, our ways of political organization, our media, and all other aspects of our society can be founded anew. The lessons that I've explained very quickly today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing questions. Questions are much more interesting than hearing me wax philosophical, which I know I have done. So I want to, give enough time for that. But these lessons do come from years of speaking with all kinds of different actors in the cooperative space, from advocates to actual cooperative, worker owners. And I've listened to the hopes, the dreams, the realizations, and the lessons that those who are engaged in this have learned themselves. Cooperative enterprises, like the capitalist enterprises in the feudal era, are the lighthouses of our time. They shine their light, narrow but bright, towards a future society not oriented towards the ruthless pursuit of profit, but to the full development of all. And to get there, we must first educate ourselves and our friends, neighbors, and coworkers about the possibilities of worker self-directed enterprises. And then we have to build, as VAWMA is doing, the conduits and connections between these enterprises, and then to finally coordinate these hitherto disparate movements into a single force that, like the bourgeois before us, can overtake the entire political economic system and orient it to the values that I believe that I'm confident we all ascribe: liberty, equality, and solidarity. So with that, that's my spiel, and I'm absolutely looking forward to hearing any and all questions that you may have of me.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kevin. I appreciate that. I'm definitely intrigued by some of the things you've been talking about. I'm right there with you with regards to the idea that that we should be focused on like political goals, this idea being like, how do we get people involved? Like really, like how do we get the functioning of our society to support what it is that we're trying to do cooperatively? So I appreciate that. I'm just going to, before I launch in with any questions here, I'm going to see if we have any questions from our group, our chat. Not that I'm seeing so far.
Nope, the online chat is pretty quiet right now, but I actually had some questions that I was going to ask Kevin, but I will let you take the floor first, Mr. James.
Oh, no, you go ask your questions first. I'm good with that.
As we battle over the guest speaker. So first off, thank you again, Kevin, for taking the time to hang out with us today. It's super exciting to hear all of the different lessons that you learned, in all honesty, like coming into this thinking like, I know the things. Oh, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so suddenly you're like, oh no, I did not know the things. So my first question is, in your experience with all of the different conversations that you've had, what has been the same consistent point that each co-op has struggled with? Has it been, what's that first business? Has it been, there's always that one guy? What's the consistent limbo bar? I don't know. I don't want to call it a roadblock, but you know what I'm saying.
I think that for those that I've talked to, there is not a dearth of, I think, interest in cooperatives, or a kind of even what you might call an entrepreneurial ethos amongst people who also have a kind of solidarity perspective, who want to combine those two things in a cooperative enterprise. For me, I think there are kind of two commingled barriers or frustrations or things that people really run into, and it's really the nuts and bolts aspects. A lot of people have really good ideas about cooperatives, and there's a lot of studies about or a lot of people who are interested in like the bylaws and how decisions should be made and are experimental about that, which is good. And I think that that's one really important thing about cooperative enterprises. What is much less known is where the money comes from, and how do you actually start the business, and luckily, well, not luckily, I think that there is also a dearth of professionals, I would count myself among them, who know about these things. I mean, I went to law school in the US, and I took a business administration course specifically to learn how businesses are structured and all these kinds of things. And much like when I was in undergraduate school and I had a macroeconomics class in which my professor told me, we will not be discussing normative economics in this class. We are only going to discuss the way the economy, I guess, theoretically works. So too did in my business administration class. We did not talk about alternative, non-standard forms of business organization. And business organization is inherently tied to economic, in terms of like you have to have a certain kind of business to get a certain kind of investment. And when you get into these nitty gritty aspects, most people who are kind of cooperative people, you have a kind of eyes glaze over aspect where it's like, well, I just wanted to create an organization that did something cool that was, cooperative. I don't want to look at like, different funding options and all this kind of stuff. And I do get that. I think it is in some ways intentionally opaque, so that it demands this kind of professionalization of starting businesses, which I think should not be the case. And if it wasn't the case, you'd probably have more democratically owned and controlled businesses. So I think ultimately, that's a very long way of answering. The question is really the show me the money and show me the LLC document and where to file that and how to do our taxes and all these kind of things. That tends to be a kind of roadblock. I've talked to so many people who have great ideas. I want to start this like cooperative venture. Who do I talk to and how do I do this? And the nice thing about being involved in the All Things Co-op podcast and other things is that we've got the employee ownership connection network and other things that we can tend to like point people in the right direction. But it is, if you went to any business school in I think the world, and you said outside of, let's say, maybe the Basque region in Spain or Emilia Romagna in Italy, there's not going to be a cooperative course. There's not going to be a course in terms of talking about cooperative bylaws and democratic management of businesses and non-extractive funding mechanisms and all these kinds of things that are really important to be able to abide by the kind of Rochdale principle basis of cooperative engagement. And so people just don't know where to go. And the cool thing is for me, having made all these connections, is that those groups are there. The issue is not so much that the money isn't there or that the people with the know-how aren't available. It's that there are not the kind of direct connections that there are. If you wanted to start a business, you just go talk to some consultants and they're everywhere. But if you wanted to start a co-op, you got to find some co-op consultant. And how do you find them? And, the nice thing is that as this progresses, I think as we, come out of the kind of haziness of the Cold War and into this sort of Fukuyama end of history moment, and which has not sort of been that, the alternative is not a lot of people who are against the sort of extractive and exploitative nature of capitalist businesses. They're not really looking, I think, in some ways, to the state to do those kinds of things. They are really looking at cooperatives to do that. And as that has kind of grown, the number of people who have this expertise, the number of people who are willing to connect and provide capital and do all these kind of things has really grown. And so this barrier, while still a barrier, decreases day after day after day. And I would, I don't have a crystal ball, but, throughout the course of my life, I'm nearing 40. I can imagine by the time I'm nearing 60, these barriers are going to be, not inconsequential, but less consequential, I might say.
That's exciting, and that's also promising. My follow-up to that actually is Nick. Last week we had Nikki. I'm not gonna be able to pronounce her last name properly. Clark.
Cook.
Thank you for the save. And we were talking about like the best startup. Like if you were me, I'm going to start a co-op business. I'm going to start a bakery. How many co-op bakeries already exist to the point where, okay, it's been done? Is it still that, no, a bakery is your best starting spot because flour, sugar, milk, well, maybe not milk anymore, but flour and sugar are your staple. Those commodities don't really fluctuate in prices. So you can kind of forecast your 5-year plan based on, I'm going to need like 17,000 tons of flour to make macaroons. I don't bake. I don't know if you put flour in macaroons. But at some point, where do you grow from the bakery and say, okay, the bakery's been done. This is what a good startup co-op business Not necessarily guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed. But what's the good kick at the can?
I think to answer that, the one of the there's two interesting developments in the cooperative movement, I'd say, in the last 10 years that are worth note. One is the union co-op
Mm,
idea, which is that you actually have a union and a co-op together. So you might simultaneously start a co-op and have the worker owners of that co-op be part of a union, such that you can then take the benefits that the long history of union organizing and activity can provide, the information and perspective about workers' rights and worker organization, all that kind of stuff, to ensure that the business maintains a worker perspective. Um, and then the other one is the idea of having a kind of, it's really like an ecosystem approach. The idea being that what you want to do is set an anchor institution. So something like, outside of, so like a bakery, all while important, provides a kind of service. What you want is either an industrial or service industry that is fundamental to even the smallest of a kind of community. So in this sense, you're talking about a hospital, like a grocery, something that provides very fundamental services and or products to a community. If you can cooperatize that institution or develop an alternative to a sort of failure or something like that, if you recognize a failure, there are, unfortunately, especially in smaller communities, a kind of failure of medical facilities and something like that. If you can re-energize or reorient or even just challenge those with a cooperative institution, uh, then all of the different kind of services around it, right? So if you have something like a hospital, laundry services, transportation services, all those different things can actually spur their own cooperatives. So then, outside of one individual anchor institution, one kind of centralized cooperative organization, you get many different cooperative organizations. So you're able to hit different demographics, different parts of the community, but still with that cooperative perspective. And so, especially combined with the idea of a sort of right to work. I mean, we remember the example in that we kind of focused on was in DC. There was this big hospital, I think it was called Providence Hospital, and it closed. Like a hospital closed. And for us, that was like, people, especially in the US, people like are in desperate need of healthcare. How can a hospital close? And especially the hospitals are like multi-billion dollar, enterprises. How could it possibly close? And lots of different. I mean, DC it's its own kind of animal. But uh, if you had a system in place. So in Washington D.C., they have this tenant option to purchase act, which is that if you're a tenant in a apartment building and the owner of the apartment building decides to sell, you have this period of time in which you can organize together with all of your tenants and get government-backed funding to buy the building and turn it into a cooperative. Right? Great law, fantastic, totally able to be translated into a worker cooperative situation where if you had a Providence Hospital situation, they said, hey, why don't we buy the hospital and then all of the laundry services, all of the transportation, all the paramedics, we can create all of these different institutions that would themselves be cooperatively owned and worker owned and with a community focus rather than simply bottom line focus. That alone could fundamentally change the dynamics within a community. And the place in which this is happening in reality is Cleveland, Ohio. There is in Cleveland several kind of anchor institutions that have themselves kind of spurred on these associated cooperative enterprises in a way that it has become an exceptional model for what it is that we can do in the world today. And I got to give a shout out to Michael Peck, one, because he's like the best guest you could possibly have on a podcast, and two, he's like the North American Mondragon representative, which Mondragon is like everyone's go-to thing. And Michael Peck's just like charisma incarnate, but he has been extremely helpful in both of those union co-op and anchor institution kind of Cleveland model, they call it, of cooperative development. And so if anyone's interested, we have 2 conversations with Michael Peck about union co-ops and the Cleveland model on the All Things Co-op podcast to kind of talk to him about the kind of lessons learned and the ways in which we can do better. But that I think is really the way to go. That is not to discourage even the kind of bread and butter bakery or coffee shop or something like that. I know like something like Vermont, where I live, there's actually been a interesting development with the recreational marijuana industry and cooperatives, that as there's a kind of new industry developing, right, that it's something that's been illegal for a long time is finally legal, and so new businesses are starting up, and you got a lot of people who were subjugated to a certain extent by the state who are now looking as ways to not have to rely on it as a mechanism and have a sort of community orientation and things like that. That has shown, I mean, I think, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's at least, I think it's 15% of the stores, the sort of commercial recreational marijuana sellers in Vermont are either partnerships or straight up cooperatives. So as new markets emerge, that would be the thing, right? You want to, so to again make a long story short, anchor institutions, good. New emerging markets, a great groundwork for cooperatives, and then those institutions that have not seen any innovation in a long time, so that might be a bakery, depending on the community you live in, are the places that are most ripe and the most advantageous for developing cooperatives, because of the ability to have that second part of what I was talking about in the talk, that kind of cooperative development, ecosystem building aspect of what it is that we really need in terms of our cooperative movement.
I was wondering if you just kind of tail ending on that that sort of idea. I wonder if you can speak a little bit to the power of converting existing businesses from capitalist enterprises to worker cooperatives, and any insights you may have with that.
Yep. So starting a business is hard. Most new businesses fail. And that's one of those things where I sort of side eye when someone says capitalism is the most efficient way of organizing your political system, because I'm like, well, sure, a lot of waste. I see a lot of businesses that start and exist for a while and then fail. And although you might have a creative destruction argument, I think it is much more destruction than it is creativity. And so where we are right now, especially I think all over the world, but in the US and in North America generally, we are very quickly approaching, if not already in the first stages of what they call the silver tsunami, which is that there are a lot of people who are older who own businesses. Many of them, I would say in the States, they were able to take advantage of the dying days of the New Deal. In Canada, I mean, you have had a neoliberal turn, but it is at least not as extreme, I guess, in some ways. I mean, Harper and Trudeau are, I think, two ends of the neoliberal move in Canada, but lest we not get into the vicissitudes of Canadian politics. But there is a wave of individuals who own businesses who have a dilemma. The dilemma before them is, do I sell my business to some private equity holding company whose goal is to extract every red cent out of this business, and if that means shuttering it and selling all the stuff that is in the business so because they don't think it's going to make enough of a profit? Or do I try to convince one of my kids or somebody who works here to kind of take it over and be the private owner who personally takes on all of the obligations, all of the risk, all that kind of stuff? or is there another way? And in the cooperative movement, I think really in the last 10 years, as this silver tsunami hits the levees, we have been advocating for that like all the time. That is really the way, because starting a new business is so hard and it takes so much research and all this kind of stuff. God, if you got a business whose owner is just like old and the business makes profit and employs people and all that kind of stuff, why wouldn't you just reorient the organization of the business to make it more democratically controlled and community focused? And many of these businesses too, you know, I have personally, I have a great criticism of what we might call the high or the hot bourgeoisie, right? The sort of Elon Musk's and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates' kind of, level of rich. It's less so with what we might, in the Marxist parlance, call the petty bourgeois, the sort of small business owner and stuff like that. In some ways, those businesses can be the most nefarious in their exploitation of workers, but they're the most ripe for worker takeover. It's much harder for the workers of Amazon to like take over Amazon, a publicly traded organization, than it is for like, Joe's Bar to take over like that bar and to be able to reorient the bar from just a place that, gets people drunk to a place that might facilitate political discussions, because it has that kind of reorientation from simply benefiting an individual to creating a community space. So I think this moment that we live in right now is able to present us with the possibility of, so long, and this is where the political aspect comes in, we do need a means of doing it. It's very hard for, especially in small business environments, for an individual worker or even couple workers to say to their owner boss, hey, I think you're getting kind of old and like maybe you should sell it to us. And then comes into things like, where do we get the money and all and those kind of stuff. So what you need is a right to work, a right to own. What we have, a whole conversation. I mentioned it with Peter Gowan, who wrote a great paper, just fantastic paper. And it's now like, that was probably 2014, 15 when I talked to him. It's a little bit, it's not dated, but it's been around for a while. This is not a super new idea, but what it takes is a political movement. And the nice thing is, the thing that I have noticed in my own individual political advocacy is that cooperatives are an amazingly bipartisan, in the US, bipartisan, I guess you tripartisan in Canada, but like it runs the gamut in terms of the political spectrum, because you'll find people who are like very conservative who are all about worker cooperatives, and you'll find the most radical communist who is also about worker cooperatives. And so if you can limit to the kind of political discourse to a very specific policy aim of simply allowing what they call right of first refusal. If the business is getting sold, we get 6 months to organize an employee organization, to get a funding to be able to purchase the business, and then we get to run it. And if you can combine that with guarantees and other kinds of like discounts on insurance and all these kinds of things, now you're talking about and what we did, I wrote legislation in Washington D.C. to do this very thing. And the other aspect of it that really is the enticing thing is that for the workers, if you can give them interest-free loans or something like that incentivizes them. For the owners, if you give them a tax holiday on that sale. So let's say the owner sells to their employee organization, then they don't have any capital gains, or they don't have to pay income tax on that sales or something like that. Now the business owner, or even their financial advisor, which many of them have, will go, dude, take the free money, sell to your employees, right? So we have to recognize the system we live in, which is one that is about profit and about bottom lines. And we have to find a way to say, okay, how can we touch someone's self-interest and a community interest? And the way to do that, especially given this silver tsunami, is the sort of right to work. And so that to me is a legitimate, narrow political goal that anyone who's interested in cooperatives can literally talk to like their own individual representative, whether that be in a city council or, up the ladder. That in my experience, I've never found someone who is opposed to that. Now I haven't gone to the Chamber of Commerce and some of these more like, traditional capitalist organizations, but when you talk to politicians, sounds like a win-win for everybody. Why wouldn't I do that? And so I think that that is really this nugget of high potential as we see, because otherwise these businesses are just going to fade. And I live in a small town right now in Vermont, and there's been some growth, but many of that growth, like I was saying, is actually cooperative. There's a new cannabis store that's a cooperative. So there's a potential that either we're going to allow parts of our economy to just wither away, which has sort of happened in the age of globalization, or we're going to see cooperative development through the right of first refusal and taking over businesses, traditionally owned businesses, into worker cooperatives as the real engine of cooperative development. And if any of those can be those anchor institutions, like I talked about, now you're talking about spinning off those other ones. We're creating cooperative economies. We can grow that cooperative economy to be a legitimate challenge in which consumers can literally say, do I want to buy from, Walmart, or do I want to go to the, locally owned, community focused worker cooperative and buy the same stuff, hopefully at similar prices, maybe a small markup with the cooperative, knowing that voting with my dollars in that way. So it's all to say there's a way of, like, in some ways, co-opting a lot of sort of traditional, even sort of capitalist or even conservative ideas about voting with your dollars and reorienting the government to, instead of giving tax breaks and incentives to regular business owners, give it to workers, give it to cooperatives, give it to people who want to create a different kind of business that isn't there simply to suck every last dollar out of everything they could possibly see or touch, and instead orient themselves towards re-energizing their communities and creating a mechanism for long-term, deep, and important social engagement.
I think we just have one possible question from the floor, and then I think we'll be done.
What I've seen in my experience in democracy, it is great and it's very strongly supported in the initial stage. The latter stage, when things are really rolling smoothly, the democracy demises because people more or less sleep at the control. So when the meeting is held, the democratic meeting is held, the bodies don't show up. That's when all hell breaks loose. There were certain individuals within that group that more or less destroyed the democracy. This happens regularly within unions.
Yep.
Hiring hall system I consider as a very dangerous area because you have a separation between the work area and the union meeting. Is very differently in a geographic separation.
In the last 2 minutes, can you speak to how do we avoid the pitfalls of losing our democracy?
Yeah, there's a significant tension, right? In one sense, not having to be at the helm all the time means that you've set your autopilot correctly, which is good, right? You don't want to have to constantly. I'm a pilot also, so like constantly adjusting your trim, right? You got this trim tab where you're up, down, up, down. You don't want to have to do that. It's easier to just press your autopilot and let it go. However, if you fall asleep at the wheel, your autopilot will take you far from the airfield. And so, to put the airplane analogy to bed, I think I think you're right. I think so there are a few ways that you can protect against it. one very sort of simple way is to set hard and fast kind of quorum rules, in which that if democratic participation diminishes, decisions literally can't happen, and people will notice, and in some ways be kind of compelled to participate. Um, though obviously my desire ultimately would be to incentivize people to participate rather than to compel them. My goal is to make people want to participate rather than feel that they must in order for the business to survive. But I'm not, sometimes you need a carrot, sometimes you need a stick. But the ultimately, I think that the other aspect is to protect against what I would call bourgeois republicanism, which is to offset decision making to smaller and smaller groups, even especially as you grow. There is this tendency that as you grow, you must do that kind of thing. That it cannot have large groups, large, sort of conversations or large voting blocks or something like that. I don't actually believe that that's the case. I think that has been a great argument for those who want to seek individual power to usurp it. So, nice. So I don't want to take the position that uh that um I think democracy, the democratic control of things, is one in which you have to the people who are engaged have to actually see that it matters. And we exist in a society that we are constantly reminded that our democratic participation, when it is asked for, which tends to be, every couple years, to just like yay or nay a group of people who don't really care about you, that decreases your incentive to genuinely participate. However, if you had a system that was responsive, that actually took your input into account, and that you felt genuinely a part of that decision making process, that is in itself a kind of incentive process to continue engaged, to be engaged in. So there has to be a conscious implementation of a sort of feedback mechanism between those who make the decisions in less democratic ways and those and the people for whom those decisions affect. That being said, I think the general principle that I always come with is that if you are affected by a decision, you have the right to participate. If you want to participate, then you can. It's free and open. And if you don't participate, then you acquiesce to whatever decision is made. My idea would be that if less and less people participate in a system that allowed genuine and honest engagement by anybody who wanted to, that means that people are genuinely accepting the decisions that those people are making. They always have an entrance back into that system. And so, because that system is an honest and genuine engagement, unlike the one we live in now, it would hopefully forestall the tendency for democracies to erode into oligarchies, aristocracies, and ultimately dictatorships.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're at 9 o'clock, so I just want to say thank you very much for your time, Kevin, and for everybody who came out here tonight. I appreciate the time that you've given.
I appreciate you guys, and the best of luck to you.
So before we bounce, let everybody know where we can find you. Where can we find your podcast? Is it on the Spotify's? Is it on the YouTubes?
It's on the YouTubes, the Spotify's, the Apples, the Googles, anywhere you can find your favorite go-to podcast. We should be there. You can go directly to us, democracyatwork.info/ATC, if you want to go right to the source. Though you might want to take the meandering route to democracyatwork.info because there's lots of good stuff there.
Nice.
I would say that the All Things Co-op part of it, the Democracy at Work website has a new co-op section, which has all kinds of information about Amelia Romana and Mondragon, the right to work stuff that I was talking about, different places that you can connect, all of our episodes, all that kind of stuff. It's all right there at the democracyatwork.info. Well worth a kind of resource check on that. you can again find us on all the socials. I even think we got like clips and stuff on Instagram if that's what you're into, though. I'm not as big into social media as I maybe once was. But and then maybe I'll give a shameless self-promotion for even me too. I do also host another podcast called the Sensible Socialist Podcast, which is we do talk about cooperatives, not an insignificant amount, but also other issues kind of involving Marxist, socialist, leftist kind of stuff. So you can check that out. Again, same kind of stuff all over social media and all that kind of stuff. But primarily check out Democracy at Work. Also Richard Wolf's stuff. It's all worth looking at. And you can email us. You can all things co-op podcast@gmail.com. Very simple. Happy to hear what anyone has to say. Any ideas, guests, desires to be guests, anything like that. Reach out to us. We're more than happy to talk to you.
That's awesome. Amazing. And yes, thank you again for taking the time tonight and for all of the information. I know I learned so much this last 4 weeks. I feel like 100% like you did when you first started your first season. I did not know what I didn't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way to live a truly examined life. And Socrates, we'd be proud.
Well, thank you once again for everybody who came out. Like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Check out the All Things Co-op podcast at Democracy at Work. And thank you everybody for coming out. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Awesome.
Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Next week.
Maybe.
Sorry, my focus is wasn't able to give it to you today.